Imagine learning that one of the most powerful queens Europe ever produced, the woman who pushed Spain toward unification, sponsored Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic, and laid the foundations of an empire, made a vow so disturbing it nearly poisoned her own court. Isabella of Castile swore an oath that turned her most intimate garment into a legend of filth, fear, and whispered disgust. Was this horror a medieval exaggeration, or did Spain's most celebrated monarch truly go almost 10 years without changing her underlinen? We are stepping into the world of Queen Isabella, the Catholic queen, whose devotion was praised in public while rotting her body in private. Inside the echoing chambers of the Castilian palace, Queen Isabella stood before nobles, clergy, and commanders. Her eyes burned with purpose. The Reconquista, the centuries-long struggle to reclaim Iberia from Muslim rule, was entering its final chapter. Only Granada remained unconquered. In that charged moment, Isabella lifted her hand toward the Virgin's image and made a vow that stunned the court. She would not change her linen chemise until Granada surrendered. A simple white garment worn closest to the skin now turned into a sacred token. Her court took it as a dramatic but holy gesture, a queen displaying humility, a ruler showing steadfast devotion, a penance meant to win God's favor. But time dragged forward in merciless procession. Days turned into months, months blurred into years, and still the same linen clung to her flesh. Through summers of blistering heat and winters of bone-deep cold, through illness, bleeding, childbirth, and military campaigns, the vow held. No one dared question her. To challenge the queen's oath was to challenge God himself. Behind the velvet curtains of the palace, her ladies whispered anxiously. Sores began forming beneath the unwashed fabric. Small patches of redness turned to weeping wounds. The smell, faint at first, grew impossible to hide. Courtiers pressed perfumed cloths to their noses during audiences. Servants worked in stiff silence, their eyes downcast, their breathing shallow. Yet Isabella refused to relent. The vow began as an act of devotion, but as the seasons passed, it twisted into something darker. An obsession that hardened her personality. Compassion faded, severity sharpened. Her sense of judgment grew rigid, brittle, frightening. What her followers claimed as holiness was, to those closest to her, a frightening unraveling. Her will became iron. Her faith became punishment. Her vow became the shadow behind everything she did. Like the cloth glued to her skin, the vow clung to her spirit and began to poison both. The decline was slow but relentless. Her complexion turned dull. Her movements stiffened. An odor followed her, clinging to the air long after she left a room. The linen beneath her royal garments hardened into a second skin, crusted with sweat, blood, and bodily discharge. Physicians, terrified to offend their queen, described her wounds with careful euphemisms. Corruption of the flesh, humors unbalanced, excess of heat trapped beneath cloth. The reality was far worse. Raw patches rubbed into open wounds. Infections took root. insects found refuge between folds of fabric and skin. No one, not even her closest attendants, was permitted to acknowledge the horror. Silence became law. The court, once alive with music and debate, transformed into a suffocating theater of denial. Ministers bowed with forced smiles as they fought the urge to gag. Servants hurried away with trembling hands. Even diplomats from distant kingdoms wrote in disbelief about the smell, the atmosphere, the queen's deteriorating body. Yet through it all, Isabella ruled. She held councils. She signed decrees. She prayed with fervor, while her body decayed underneath jewels and velvet. Her vow now defined her, a queen both revered and feared, radiant with divine mission, yet collapsing from within. A sovereign whose devotion had crossed the threshold into self-destruction. What began as a vow of piety soon twisted into a nightmare of flesh and spirit. Isabella's body decayed beneath the unwashed garment, and her mind, once sharp, disciplined, admired, began to warp under the strain. The queen who had once been praised for intellect now drifted toward obsession. Her body failed first. Her gait became unsteady, her breath shallow. A sickly haze clung to her presence, a smell that even incense could not hide. Her ladies, forced to attend to her every morning, whispered of rashes that had darkened into angry sores. The linen, once white, had turned into a hardened shell, crusted with years of sweat, fluids, and blood. Yet she would not let it be removed. The vow had consumed her. Physicians attempted to examine her, speaking in gentle riddles that masked their horror. They noted trapped humors, corruption beneath the fabric, and skin afflicted by divine burdens. Sores had burst beneath the cloth. Pus and blood formed sticky layers. The garment fused to her skin in places. Parasites burrowed in the warm, damp folds. Some courtiers fainted during audiences. Others left pale, trembling, nauseated for hours. Still, none dared suggest the garment be changed. To challenge her vow was blasphemy, an insult to the queen and to God. So silence became the kingdom's armor. The royal hall, once a place of debate and ceremony, turned into a stage where everyone pretended not to notice the rot spreading from the throne outward. Foreign envoys recorded the truth in private letters. They described a queen who looked spectral, as though she were rotting while still alive. Yet, her authority remained fearsome and absolute. Isabella's physical torment infected her mind. Where she once ruled with strategic brilliance, she now demanded rituals without reason. Prayers had to be recited in exact order. Chapel candles lit in a precise number. Objects placed at perfect angles. The slightest deviation triggered anger. Her devotion had mutated into obsession. Courtiers lived in terror of missteps. Ministers waited hours for decisions, while she repeated the same prayer again and again. Her chamber became suffocating, thick with the smell of decay and incense. Her gown emitted a stench compared to long-dead bodies left under the sun. Servants who recoiled were dismissed under vague excuses. Faintness, weak constitution, spiritual retreat. In truth, they had simply been unable to endure the air around her. Foreign ambassadors left Spain nauseated, their letters trembling with accounts of horror. One French diplomat confessed he was sick for days after an audience with the Queen. Still, she refused any comfort or relief. In her mind, her suffering purified the kingdom. The war for Granada, intended to be decisive and swift, became a reflection of Isabella's inner decay. Under her obsessive gaze, the campaign dragged on needlessly. Surrender letters from Granada's rulers were dismissed as temptations from the devil. She insisted the kingdom must not merely fall, it must break, bleed, and suffer as she had. She lived near the front lines, surrounded by soldiers who whispered dark superstitions, that black blood seeped from her wounds, that insects moved beneath her garments, that she was no longer entirely human. Officers wrapped perfumed cloths around their faces before approaching her tent. Even so, no one dared defy her. Her authority did not weaken with her body. It grew fiercer, sharper, almost supernatural. One man, Cardinal Mendoza, saw the danger clearly. He wrote letters, never sent, describing her as trapped in a spiral of holy madness, worshiping pain instead of God. He burned the letters in fear. The siege stretched from months into years. Supplies dwindled. Men froze to death, starved, or perished from disease. But the Queen persisted. Her vow had become a living banner, a symbol of suffering under which Spain marched. When Granada finally surrendered in 1492, the victory tasted hollow. The kingdom was exhausted, the soldiers broken, and Isabella herself was barely clinging to life. Yet in her eyes, victory proved that God approved her torment. Her suffering was holy. Her rotting body was a sacrifice the heavens had accepted. As Spain celebrated triumph outside, inside the palace, the Queen's chamber became a place of dread. Her ladies-in-waiting suffered most. Dressing the Queen meant touching her diseased skin, handling the hardened, foul-smelling chemise, enduring the stench so thick that many vomited after leaving her presence. Some developed sores on their hands. Others lost hair or fell ill with strange fevers. One by one, they disappeared from service, quietly, discreetly. Yet no one could speak the truth. Her vow had become sacred. Her suffering was framed as holy endurance. To recoil from her illness was to insult God. Thus, the palace lived in forced reverence, choking on incense and fear. Priests blessed her from a distance, unwilling to approach too closely. Servants rotated frequently, their faces pale, their steps hurried. Even rats scurried boldly through the walls, drawn by the foul conditions. But the Queen remained unshaken, convinced her torment was divine. Her vow had transformed her court into a sanctuary of silence, rot, and ritual. Granada had fallen at last. The banners of Castile and Aragon fluttered above the Alhambra like victorious angels. Spain rejoiced, But inside Isabella's private chambers, a darker triumph unfolded. For the first time in nearly 10 years, she allowed the garment, the vow-bound linen fused to her skin, to be removed. What her physicians uncovered was nothing short of horrifying. The moment they began cutting the fabric away, strips of her skin tore with it. The linen hadn't merely clung to her body, it had merged into it. The chamber filled with the metallic scent of blood mixed with herbal fumes intended to mask infection. Even the most experienced surgeons recoiled. Beneath the cloth, her body was a battlefield, sores swollen with pus, blackened patches of dying flesh, raw ulcers that bled at the slightest touch, angry rashes spread across her hips and thighs, skin peeling in sheets. Years of vermin, sweat, and festering wounds had crushed her body's defenses. Yet Isabella barely made a sound. Her hands trembled, her breath came shallow, but she refused to scream. Her silence was terrifying, the silence of someone who believed pain was sacred. For weeks afterward, she remained hidden from public view, her chamber sealed. Physicians fought infection, fever, and internal collapse. Every whispered rumor was covered with excuses. She is fasting. She is praying. She is recovering from overwork. But inside the sealed room, they were battling death. It was during this fragile period, barely able to sit upright, that Isabella issued one of the most devastating orders in Spanish history, the Edict of Expulsion, Alhambra Decree. Every Jew in Spain, families settled for centuries, must leave or convert. Entire communities were uprooted. Infants, elders, scholars, artisans, all forced toward ports and borders within weeks. Sacred scrolls hidden beneath cloaks, homes abandoned, futures erased. To Isabella, this was purification. Her suffering had become national policy. Her own torment fueled a crusade outward, a final cleansing of her kingdom, no matter the human cost. And from the wealth stripped from exiled families emerged the funds that launched Christopher Columbus toward the western seas. An empire financed by ashes. The irony was grotesque. Spain's future glories were paid for by a purge born from a queen's decaying vow. Isabella's obsession infected the court like a plague. Nobles who once donned velvet now walked barefoot, bleeding from self-inflicted lashes. They whipped themselves in chapels, crying not in agony, but in devotion. Pain became the currency of faith. To show joy was arrogance. To laugh was impious. To question suffering was treason. Artists abandoned beauty for torment. Murals once filled with cherubs were replaced by scenes of saints writhing in agony. Music turned to hollow chants. Scholars fled. Physicians whispered warnings, only to be silenced. Isabella did not demand this. She didn't need to. Her example was enough. A kingdom copies its queen. Spain became a land where suffering was holiness and silence was survival. Isabella died in 1504. The woman who united a realm, financed voyages across oceans, and expelled entire civilians, was laid in marble with incense and solemn hymns. Yet death did something strange. It polished her memory. Chroniclers softened her darkness. Painters erased the sores. Sculptors carved her face youthful and serene. Poets called her Mother of Spain. The vow that had nearly killed her, the foul garment fused to her flesh, became retold as holy discipline. The truth was buried under reverence. But cracks in the myth remained. Her daughter Joanna wandered palace halls, murmuring to shadows. Some claimed she saw Isabella's ghost. Others said she inherited her mother's torment. The world called her Juana la Loca. The legacy of obsession continued. Even centuries later, Isabella's story refuses to rest. Historians dig through mass graves, letters, and medical notes. Anthropologists study the cultural trauma of entire communities erased. Psychologists point to obsessive-compulsive disorder intertwined with religious mania. Epidemiologists trace outbreaks back to her decaying court. They reveal a queen whose vow spiraled from piety to pathology, and from pathology into national doctrine. What she did to herself, allowing her body to rot under divine purpose, was horrifying. But what she did to Spain through that same obsession was far greater. Whole populations expelled, scholars silenced, cultures erased, fear institutionalized, suffering glorified. Her vow was personal. Its consequences were generational. Isabella was both saint and tyrant, visionary and destroyer, martyr and monster. Her vow-bound garment, though buried centuries ago, remains one of history's most unsettling symbols. Not because of the cloth itself, but because of what it represents. When faith hardens into fanaticism, when devotion becomes destruction, when one ruler's obsession becomes the chain of an empire. Her linen rotted away, yet the memory of it endures, woven now not from fabric, but from fear, silence, and the ruin of those who lived under her shadow.